Welcome to the Modern Arizona Podcast. We share the stories of people whose lives are shaped by the legal system in Arizona and beyond. Each episode blends real experiences, expert insights, and practical guidance to give you a deeper understanding of the law and its impact on everyday life.
Hello and welcome to the Modern Arizona Podcast. I'm your host, Billie Tarasio, joined today by Whitney Harvey, principal and founder of the Self-Coach Lawyer. I recently had the privilege of working with Whitney at our law firm's retreat. And you are a former litigator turned coach, wellness guru, PhD candidate. Talk to us first a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Billie. I just loved being present at the retreat and just seeing what modern law is up to. It's so inspiring. As far as my journey, I've had a very interesting career. And I think what's been central to my career is just me trying to listen to the nudges and just go with where I feel the most fulfilled. So I started out my practice doing insurance defense litigation, and that's in the realm of personal injury, but working on behalf of insurance companies. And then over time, I realized that wasn't the most fulfilling for me. And I really wanted to be an advocate and get more into the client counseling side. So I switched to plaintiff's personal injury. And that's really fighting on behalf of people that are hurt, the injured parties or claimants. So as I did that pivot, I also was simultaneously looking at different gaps I saw in the profession around burnout, high levels of stress, breakdowns in communication, and just workplaces, how that could sometimes be triggering environments. And so during the pandemic, I really came home to myself and got really reflective about how fulfilled I was at that time, which I wasn't that fulfilled. And I really became impassioned with the idea of serving the profession, of, really looking at workplaces, looking at some of these breakdowns in the way we work, and trying to do more around workplace well-being and bringing programming to organizations so that we can serve our clients in the most efficient and impactful way. So here we are. I started the Self-Coach Lawyer 3 years ago, which is a coaching and consulting practice and just really helps legal professionals thrive and not just survive in the practice of law.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's fabulous. One of the things I want to know is how are workplaces setting up well-being or not? Like what is working in workplaces and what is not working in workplaces?
Right. So such a good question. And it's almost like a very big experiment right now, because I feel like coming out of the pandemic, we had a big push for remote work or hybrid work. And that has been very helpful for flexibility and autonomy. So people can, if they're taking care of children or loved ones, they have that built into their work environment. But on the other side of that is isolation and a lot of people feeling disengaged because they are, remote or not getting that social interaction that we once had by being fully present in the workplace. So I think the flexibility and autonomy is helping people navigate transitions and be able to still work and not, miss out on work. But then it's also not feeding that engagement that we need for connection. So I think that we'll see kind of people trying to figure that out in the workplace. But I do think it's giving people time back and it's making work sustainable for their everyday lives. Other programming that I'm seeing work well is I'm seeing a lot of legal organizations, which is really inspiring, start offering well-being programming, stipends, things that can just pour into their people and they can utilize it at their own pace and timing. So whether it's being able to go to a retreat or go to participate in a meditation or a class or, something like that, that they can do at their own pace, something beyond going to the gym. We've seen those benefits offered for some organizations, but really letting people choose for them their personal well-being toolkit and what's going to best serve them in that current time in their life.
Wonderful. Yeah, that all makes sense and is very consistent with my experience at Modern Law. Before COVID, we were mostly in office, but people could work from home. And then post-COVID, it's just kind of flopped on its head where we're mostly from home, but can go into the office. And I do feel like it's made a big impact on my home life.
Yeah, definitely. It's hard to, once we're at home working, it's hard to associate home with being home. And so sometimes we tend to work more when we are working from home. So that's the interesting conundrum,
Mm-hmm.
is home's not this safe abode
Mm-hmm.
for some people. And it's now
Mm-hmm.
retraining ourselves that home is still home and can be separate from work. It's an ongoing
Mm.
conversation,
Okay.
very, yeah, challenging to do that to the mind when in the body when you're used to working at home and you don't really get a
Yeah.
separation, physical separation from the two.
So the other thing I want to ask you, because you spend time like in the profession of law, which is interesting to me, you know, a 20-year lawyer. And for a long, long, long time, the conversation was about how law was unconducive to women and moms. And so you have more women graduating law school, you have more women becoming lawyers than men right now, but very few represented as partners or in leadership capacities. Are you seeing that change at all?
You know, I am seeing personally a lot of women that are proactively seeking out ways to avoid leaving the profession. So, excuse me, although I don't know that the numbers have, or what the numbers have been in the last couple of years, I personally, in working with women, they're catching themselves, they're building that resiliency and that self awareness. And before they actually make the leap to leave, they're seeking out resources and trying to find ways that maybe they can salvage this career or make it work for them. So that's been incredibly exciting. And I do think that was a gift of the pandemic of, you know, not saying you aspire to necessarily be a TikTok lawyer or, you know, just content creator, which there's nothing wrong with that. But I think it really helped a lot of women attorneys reimagine what they could do or the way the practice of law could look, whether they are part-time or even working on a freelance or fractional basis. That's something I've actually picked up for myself in the last year and a half, which has been very rewarding. Or, you know, deciding to be
Mm-hmm.
adjunct faculty and, you know, teaching or speaking, doing a speaking
Mm-hmm.
consultancy. So I think it's really getting a lot of people excited around how it could look for them without them feeling like they have to leave and then perhaps try to re-enter later. I've also seen that pathway for some women where they took a decade or so off, raised their children, and then decided this is time for me now
Yeah.
to work the way I want to work. And I don't have any barriers to doing that now.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go full throttle into the practice because I didn't have the opportunity before.
You mentioned resilience, and resilience seems to be another thing happening right now. I just dropped off my son at college this last weekend, and he was so excited and he was so ready. It was in Boston. The weather was perfect. The skies were blue. The clouds were white. Like it was perfect. And nobody was outside. And when I dropped him off and moved him in, most of his roommates were in the dorm looking at screens. And that seems to be connected to this lack of resilience where it's just so comfortable. People are not resilient. They're not comfortable being uncomfortable. And practicing law is uncomfortable. Let's just make that super clear. That's the job. The job is
Yeah.
to take discomfort of others and figure it out for them. So, what are you seeing with regards to resilience and how are people building resilience? Because that's what you mentioned.
Absolutely. Such a great point. And I love that you were just in Boston. I was just in Boston a couple of weeks ago. I actually toured Harvard University. And so there were some students moving in. But that's such a great point, especially I see this
Were
in
they
teaching.
outside?
They were outside, but yeah, they were outside. They were outside. And I do think, you
Good.
know, and you're right, you know, but it's also the start of the semester. And I think people are super engaged in the beginning. And then you see, you know, some of that taper off, especially when I've taught on campus at Arizona State University. I see the excitement in the beginning and then the realities kind of shift as you get underway with your studies for some students. So I think you bring up such a great point about not being outdoors. There really are so many immense benefits to stepping outside. We have free natural medicine, if you will, that's available to us with the sun, with trees. There's all of this literature around just how soothing it can be to even look at a tree for 30 seconds, 30 seconds and just take a pause. So when we're only indoors, we're really depriving ourselves of that reboot and that boost of energy and clarity that we need. So in terms of how people are seeking out resiliency right now, I think there's a lot of people that are not aware that they have a resiliency issue. So I'm seeing a lot of people just disengage. We kind of see that social media is pulling everyone in. That's their prime social interaction for many. Especially, in Gen Z generation. And so there is more anxiety. There is an increase in depression. And like you said, get out, get outside, get outdoors, reach out to someone, strike up a conversation. Things that we were kind of inherently forced to do because we didn't have social media present the way that it was. We have to now guide and teach others and remind them, go ahead and do that. Social media is one avenue for communication and socializing, but there's immense benefits to communicating and having that village outside of social media. So I think there is a lack of awareness around it. But for those that are noticing that disconnection, they are seeking out community. They're seeking out in-person events. What's ways that I can, really create a sense of myself outside of just what I do and what I'm known for, and just really be myself authentically. So it's joining groups, finding hobbies, and trying to see what works for you, see what doesn't work for you, but doing something rather than just being stuck in freeze mode.
Okay, I think I want to ask you if we're talking about a lawyer or we're talking about somebody who has just gone through a divorce or they're going through a divorce. What are some signs that they need to increase that resilience and do something different versus just taking that time for introspection and healing?
Right. Absolutely. Such a good question. So I talk a lot about burnout, and I think we classically think of burnout, in the professional sense, which is true. That's kind of how they've classified it. But I also see burnout just in a lack of motivation, a lack of drive that you can experience socially, not just professionally. So a lot of that is this chronic fatigue, this sense of I don't have a clear direction. I don't know what my purpose is. I don't really feel passionate about a lot of things. It's kind of like blah. You kind of hear someone say, meh, yeah, everything's okay. And they're not catching that there's not one thing they can identify that is positive in their lives. That's usually a big red flag or indicator to me when I'm having a conversation with someone that they can be burnt out or just feeling a lack of purpose or clear sense of direction. So when that happens, I've noticed the biggest way to start trying to get out of that, because it can be so multi-layered, as you know. Maybe it is therapy, maybe it is coaching and support, maybe it's, family resources, whatever that is for that individual, it will vary. But it often starts with the story and the narrative that we have in our minds. So if we're saying to ourselves, nothing ever works out for me, no one's ever on my side, of course it didn't go my way, you're going to tend to your brain is going to tend to see more of that. Versus if you take an opposite approach and say, I've been through some challenging circumstances, but I can look back and I can see where things were okay once I got through it. It ended up working out in my favor, or I ended up growing from it. Then your brain will start to spot more instances like that. So those are just the reframe and the story you're telling yourself is a powerful way to transition when you're in a rut and when you're really having a hard time seeing your way through it. You have to pull from the past to get to the other side.
Yeah, I like that a lot. glazing yourself with toxic positivity. I'm a big fan of that. I really actually believe it, even when sometimes people are like, Billie, you're just completely over the top with your positivity. But how much of that do you think though is just people are born a certain way?
Yeah, I do think that, the formative years of from 0 to 7 or 8 years old is where we learn a lot through social conditioning, through modeling, seeing, examples in front of us. So whether we were born with it or we learned it, it is critical in our childhood. So a lot of our
Mm.
beliefs, our thoughts, our actions are tied to this very crucial development period in our lives that most times we have no real awareness of. We don't remember that much from 0 to 8 years old. But unfortunately, we're collecting a
No.
lot of we don't. We're collecting a lot of those experiences. So even though we might have inadvertently picked up certain belief systems and behaviors, it doesn't mean that it's too late to shift those things or to change those things. The brain is so powerful in your ability to retrain. It's called cognitive retraining, and it's accessible and available to anyone, even if you can't afford to do cognitive behavioral therapy or something like that. You can start to help yourself retrain the way you think by doing simple exercises. And we can talk about a few, but just like I said, starting with the narrative of what's triggering me and what am I telling myself? And then how can I flip that on its head and say it in a more positive or empowering way? How can I revisit that narrative and make it serve me in a better way? That's one way to retrain your brain without needing to spend a lot of resources
Mm-hmm.
or money or financial obligations to get there.
Okay, so if somebody is hearing this and they're like, I know I need to do this, how long is it going to take? How many, like, what type of effort are they going to need to put in terms of time and consistency? And then when will they see a difference?
Great question. Everyone is different. And so the process, and it really does depend on where you're at in your healing journey. And I can just speak personally to myself. No human being is immune from the healing process. I think we should share that more, whether you're a professional, whether you're a parent. Like, we all have experiences that hurt us, whether we recognize it or not. And so we all have healing that we can do, whether we choose to or not. And so I think for me, I didn't recognize as a young lawyer, there was healing I had to do just from my personal individual life. Then you go through the practice, there was healing I had to do in my interactions in the practice, being exposed to trauma of clients and injustices of clients, all of those things we pick up on as well. So it can take a while. It can take years. And I also honestly think as long as we're living, there's probably always going to be something we're navigating through and trying to heal from. Maybe it's not at the forefront of our mind. Maybe the wound has gotten smaller and smaller and virtually non-existent. But it might be still present. For instance, I grew up without a biological father. That's something that I think is going to be with me probably the entirety of my life. I don't want to claim that, but I just have the awareness that there is that void that I will never have. And so that wound is lessened because I've created space to feel anger, frustration, hurt around it, change the narrative, acknowledge that it wasn't personalized to me, it wasn't my fault. And then I've chosen to speak authentically, speak my truth. And I think that's been very freeing and liberating. So, in terms of how long it can take, it varies. But I've been on my own healing journey, I'd say the last decade. And it shifts. It shifts from focusing on that to now I'm focusing on different issues. It's different things that I don't, consume myself with necessarily my upbringing, but now I'm focused on other things. So when you participate in therapy or other strategies for helping you to make sense of your lived experience, that can be an accelerant for you, the healing process. I'm a big proponent of therapy. I've done it, and you don't have to be in it for life, but I think it can be incredibly eye-opening as you're trying to navigate very challenging circumstances. Something I wanted to talk about that was piggybacking on what we just discussed is, as you know, I am certified in HypnoBreathwork. And that combines hypnosis, meditation, and breathwork to bring this accelerated healing experience. And it's doing that by retraining what's in our subconscious mind. That's what's our limiting beliefs, what is framing our view of the world. It might be holding us back. So when you asked about how long can this take, with HypnoBreathwork, we've seen some in the field of psychotherapy talk about how one session can be extremely immenseful and can accomplish more than what you might see in a 1-year period if someone were participating and purely doing therapy. So it's a great mechanism to add to the toolbox. If you're already in therapy, you feel like you've gotten some traction in talking things through, but you've noticed that maybe things have started to stale, maybe you're getting stagnant, and maybe you're over intellectualizing your experience because you know what to tell the therapist, you know what to do to get the stamp of approval, and maybe you need now more of a challenge. And that's where something like breath work or a somatic type of therapy could be more beneficial than talk therapy or traditional therapy in that sense.
Yeah, I do think like there's so much, all of these things are so related, right? Our what we eat, our hormones, how we're sleeping, how much time we're outside, how much physical activity we're getting, the energy of people around us. Like none of this is straightforward, and it's all, to me, very, very, very holistic. And there are ways you can biohack your way to get there faster, right? Than just talking or thinking.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm so glad you mentioned even the energy of others. So that's something I often talk about because, for those that are into quantum, physics and science of that nature, there really is this energetic field and we're all pulled into it so that we've felt it. If someone walks into a room, you can feel this high vibration, you can feel this magnetism and you're pulled in their direction. They're super upbeat. You feel yourself smiling and maybe a little happier because you're in surrounding with that person. On the other hand, we've seen the opposite where someone walks in or they say something and you feel the energy get sucked out of the room. You feel everyone's mood shift in maybe a more negative way. And so that's a clear example of how our energy is interconnected. So that if you're constantly around people and you're absorbing the energies of those that are more low vibrational or a little bit more pessimistic or negative, that's going to tend to rub off on you, even if that's not your intention.
How do lawyers reach you if they want to work with you, if they are feeling a little stuck? How can they find you?
I can be found on LinkedIn under Whitney Harvey, and I know we'll have the link attached. I can also be found at The Self Coach Lawyer on Instagram. And my website is theselfcoachlawyer.com. You can always send a message if you want to reach out. There's also resources on there for attorneys that are navigating workplace well-being, burnout, and client service.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. I've really appreciated having you and also for you coming to our retreat. I'm sure it's not the last time that we'll work together with you at Modern Law, but thank you for sharing your time here.
Thank you for having me, Billie.
Have a great day.
You too.
Thanks so much for listening to the Modern Arizona podcast. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, make sure to download it, like it, leave a review, and share it with your friends. If you know someone who would be a good guest or you would like to be on the Modern Arizona podcast, make sure to give us an email or reach out to us at mymodernlaw.com.